Hey, there's a new day in Washington. They're doing funny things up there still. You know, I have been a fan of the Tea Party. I thought that they represent a strain of American politics that's very helpful and wholesome, and it goes back to the roots and founding of this nation. Good. The Tea Party was what happened in Boston when we revolted against the taxes from England. However, there comes a time that rebels have to grow up and work to make the system successful. And unfortunately, the Tea Party is not going along, and if they don't go along in another few hours, our government defaults, and that is a catastrophic thing for the finances of this great nation. So what's happened is, instead of John Boehner being a hero and leading a vast army, he is now demoralized, unable to lead his troops, and the game has gone back to the Senate. And they're going to give a bill up, and then Boehner's going to have to put it up before the entire House and let the Democrats come in and save his bacon. It's not a pleasant day for the Republicans, but that's the way it goes. It's politics. Terry?
Well, members in both parties say that they're confident they can reach a deal, but after weeks of talks, they're not there yet. Ephraim Graham has the story.
The Senate is still working on a bipartisan deal, a temporary fix that would reopen the government until January 15th, extend the nation's credit limit until February 7th, and make no changes to Obamacare.
Now is the time to be magnanimous and sit down and get this thing done. We've got to turn this around, and the Democrats had better help us.
House Republicans tried Tuesday to come up with an alternative plan, but it was rejected by Tea Party Republicans before it even came over for a vote. In an interview with WABC Tuesday, President Obama expressed his frustration with House Speaker John Boehner.
There have been repeated situations where we have agreements, then he goes back, and it turns out that he can't control his caucus.
As Thursday's debt ceiling deadline approaches, Wall Street is getting nervous. The markets closed down Tuesday after one of the top 3 credit rating agencies put the U.S. credit rating under review for a downgrade. President Obama says he expects something will be done today, and he told WABC he doesn't think Republicans will try and go this far again.
The Republicans, recognizing this was not a good strategy and seeing a horrible reaction from the American people, I'm pretty sure they're not going to run this play again.
Still, a short-term solution means this crisis could happen all over again at the start of next year. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Thanks, Ephraim. The big problem, folks, is very simple. We don't have the political will at the grassroots to really change what's happening, because everybody wants his or her piece of the pie, and nobody wants to give up the goodies they're getting from Washington. And when over 50% of the population receives benefits from the central government, then democracy as we know it is in decline, because the good of the nation takes second place to individual selfish desires. And people say, well, I want my piece of it. And, you know, whatever happens down the road, that's tough luck, but I want mine now. I want my benefits. I want my health insurance. I want my Social Security. I want my unemployment. I want my whatever. And unless we get together as a nation and say, we're going to put the good of our country ahead of our personal desires, until we do that, we're not going to have a situation in Washington, because those people, after all, they're voted by us, and they reflect their constituents. And each one's hanging on for his, quote, constituency. Well, a good friend of mine, one of America's spiritual leaders, is speaking out on this very crisis. And John Jessup has that story from Washington. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. Evangelist Franklin Graham says greed, lust, and wickedness are at the heart of what's wrong with Washington. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, the evangelist and leader of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association says America is in crisis because it no longer has time or room for God.
Our government is in trouble. Our country is in trouble. We are in moral decay. We're in economic decay. Our politicians don't know right from wrong. and our politicians come to this city, and they fight one another, and it's the greed in their hearts, the lust that's in their hearts, and they make all these rules and laws that affect the rest of us, and the government spins and spins and spins, and they don't have the money to pay for it. But the politicians are trying to use that money to buy votes in favor for themselves, and it's so greedy and so wicked and so wrong. But this is what happens when you take God out of government and out of our schools.
Graham says the Christian gospel has the power to change hearts and lives and fix the country. He's promoting the latest book from his father, Billy Graham, called The Reason for My Hope. His organization is preparing an evangelistic event that will feature a message from Billy Graham on broadcast TV next month, just as he turns 95. The Southern Baptist Convention's health plan is suing the Obama administration over its contraception mandate. That's the requirement in Obamacare that forces all employers to provide birth control coverage to employees, including drugs that may cause abortions. Churches and some religious employers are exempt, but the Obama administration is still threatening heavy penalties to many ministry organizations if they don't comply. The Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty said in a written statement the government's refusal to treat these ministries as religious employers is senseless. These people spend their lives teaching and preaching their religious faith. If they do not qualify as religious employers, the government needs to get a new definition. Well, some religious liberty advocates are warning about a growing number of cases of hostility against religious freedom in America. Paul Strand talked to some of the people who say they've personally experienced antagonism against their religious beliefs.
Unveiled at this weekend's Values Voter Summit, the new survey from the Family Research Council and Liberty Institute shows a frightening trend. Last year's survey documented 600 cases of religious hostility, and this year...
This survey that we're releasing right now is almost 1,200, so we've almost doubled in just 1 year.
One such case, college student Audrey Jarvis, who wears a cross, well, religiously, was asked twice to take it off or at least hide it at a student orientation.
My supervisor came up to me out of nowhere and asked me to remove my cross necklace because he thought that it would be offensive to incoming freshmen.
Jarvis received an apology from her college, but couldn't forget how hurtful the man was who found her cross so objectionable.
I think he was just kind of ignorant to the fact that his words could offend me in attempting to not offend somebody else.
Air Force Senior Master Sergeant Philip Monk says he got in trouble with his lesbian commanding officer when she ordered him to answer how he felt about gay marriage.
This is about religious freedom because I expressly stated that I had a religious conviction that wouldn't allow me to answer the question the way it was posed to me.
Craig James was 1 hour into a new job as a Fox Sports analyst when he was booted off the air. James and Liberty Institute insist it was because a top network manager disapproved of a statement James made about gay marriage 15 months before in a political debate.
They knew who I was, what I stood for, and I'm being punished. I was fired for my religious beliefs.
Fox Sports says James just wasn't a good fit. Mateer and Liberty Institute are fighting to get James his job back, and he's still pretty peeved.
This is not about me. It's not about Craig James. This is about an American who had a job that someone came back, a big corporation, and said, hey, we can't allow you on our network because of your belief and definition of what marriage is.
With some 1,200 cases like these documented in the new religious hostility survey, Mateer says he's frightened for his country.
The threats are increasing at a dramatic rate, and this survey demonstrates that.
Matt Staver's Liberty Council also fights for the faithful.
What we're seeing is instead of religious liberty being protected as it is affirmed by the First Amendment, people of faith, particularly Christians, are now finding themselves the target of discrimination.
Sergeant Monk says now is when Christians facing hostility must hold steady, mostly for other believers.
They need to see us stand firm in our faith, and when they see that, I think we'll see a turn of events.
Mateer points out when believers fight back, they almost always win. So only by meekly accepting defeat will they let the enemies of religion triumph.
They've stated their objective is to remove God from our public life. Well, if we remain silent, then that's going to happen.
This survey certainly makes for scary reading because so many groups of Americans are attacked in it. Teachers, students, governments, businesses, senior citizens, all united by the fact that they face religious hostility in an America that seems ever more tolerant of this kind of intolerance. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, it's almost as if the First Amendment and the free exercise of religion no longer exist.
Well, you know, when you read the Bill of Rights, that's the first thing. Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's much more important than free speech or free press. It's the freedom of religion came first in the Bill of Rights. But we've ignored it, and what's happened is, and I wrote about it some years ago, and it's happening, is that those who were despised in a sense because they were breaking God's laws have now become the ones who are the despisers, and they are putting the screws on Christians. So it's tough, but it's been tough before. Christians had to go to the arena, to the lions in Rome. They were burned at the stake. They have been sawn asunder. They have been counted as evil. And Jesus said, don't be surprised when men hate you. They hated me too. So the thing of it is, we shouldn't feel like we're some downtrodden group, but we ought to recognize here in America particularly, evangelical Christians, pro-family Roman Catholics make up the majority of our people. And we just need to get together. I formed some years ago something called the Christian Coalition. Everybody was all scared to death of it, but it just swept through elections, swept through various contests, because we had the votes, we had the people, the Christians there. They just need to get organized and to understand they can't sit idly by in their churches and sing hymns and shut the doors and let the world go on around them. They have to take a stand and assert themselves. And if they don't, then the tide will roll over them. We don't want that to happen. John?
Pat, the Supreme Court will decide whether to block key parts of the Obama administration's plans for environmental regulations. The court will hear a case that involves the power of the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA has the authority to regulate the emissions from mobile sources like cars, but the EPA has claimed that authority gives it the power to regulate emissions from stationary objects like power plants and factories. Critics say the agency is overreaching and going beyond what the law allows it to do. Belly fat in middle age can lead to problems with your mind later in life. People who have high rates of belly fat are about 3.5 times as likely to develop memory loss and dementia when they're older. That's according to a new study from Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. It found that people with greater belly fat have a smaller amount of a key protein in their bodies. That protein is important for memory and learning. But having a healthy weight could help you avoid memory problems as you get older. Pat, we all know that you're a health guru. Can you explain the link between memory and belly fat?
Well, I didn't do this research on it, John, but I'm sure it has great.
Yes.
That's why I have such a startling memory. I have a hard time remembering my secretary's name sometimes. You know, it's just.
You have a mind like a steel trap. I'd like 1/10 of your memory.
Well, would you like to know my diet? I'll show you how many fruits and vegetables and
I know, you are very diligent.
And I take a handful of vitamins, and I try to stay healthy.
You do. You're very diligent,
Okay.
and the rest of us need to follow suit.
All right, kill the belly fat.
Yeah.
All right.
The death toll from the 7.2 magnitude earthquake that hit the Philippines is up to 144 people. So far, 3 people have been pulled alive from the rubble, and officials say another 291 are injured. The central island of Bohol was hit the hardest, with historic churches dating from the Spanish colonial period suffering major damage. Many roads and bridges were also destroyed, which hampered the rescue efforts. CBN Disaster Relief is preparing to travel to the region to help the victims. Well, at least 17 people are dead and 50 more missing in Japan in the aftermath of a powerful typhoon. With winds of more than 110 miles an hour, the typhoon caused deadly mudslides, destroying dozens of homes on an island south of Tokyo. Tokyo's public transportation was paralyzed and flights were canceled, leaving hundreds of passengers stranded. Town officials still don't know how bad the extent of the damage is. The typhoon's expected to hit northern Japan later this week. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.